Hello, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the 2025 2-CD and 1 Blu-ray edition of Camel's Nude, released recently by Esoteric Records. This is one of the 4 Esoteric 2025 Camel reissues, which also includes Mirage from 1974, Moon Madness from 1976, and the Pressure Points film from 1984. 1975's The Snow Goose will follow in late May. You can see my reviews of both Mirage and Moon Madness on my channel, and later next month I do hope to cover The Snow Goose. Originally released in 1981, this edition of Nude comes in a clamshell box and is a reprint of the Ben Wiseman remaster and Stephen W. Tayler stereo and 5.1 mixes. These mixes were previously released in the Airborne MCA and Decca Years boxed set. Now, before some of you cry out cash grab, remember that the Airborne set, while great value for money, was quite expensive at the time of release and was hardly geared toward the casual fan. Now, it is out of print and even pricier. It should also be mentioned that the liner notes included by Mark Powell, while short, are extremely informative, and I have found them invaluable research for this series of videos. I consider myself a casual fan of Camel. I probably heard them around 10 years ago or so via the early 2000s remasters, and the albums I'm most familiar with are Mirage, Snow Goose, and Moon Madness. I also had the debut, but when I started my audio business, I sold most of my CDs off, meaning that these reissues from Esoteric are actually a great way for me to hear these again for the first time in years, and in the case of Nude, for the first time ever. So some quick background on Camel and, getting us up to speed with 1981's Nude album. Camel are a 1970s progressive rock band formed in Guildford, UK. When I think of Camel, what comes to mind is the sort of classically informed, jazzy, light, mostly symphonic and instrumental take on prog, best exemplified by their album, The Snow Goose. They have a softer side when compared to other bands of the era, and could be most easily compared to the likes of Pink Floyd or Genesis. There's also a guitar-led jazz fusion element, coupled with rock, that means that their 70s records could sit comfortably within the same collection as Jeff Beck's Blow by Blow, or even Caravans in the Land of Grey and Pink. With Nude, the reference points become a little bit more challenging to pin down. Sometimes the softer, poppier side of this album puts me in the mind of bands like the Alan Parsons Project, or even Supertramp. But it is such a dynamic and diverse record that in the end, I can really only compare it to other Camel works. 1981's Nude arrives at an interesting turn in the band's career. Following the tour for 1976's Moon Madness, original bassist Doug Ferguson was asked to leave due to the band's increasing interest in developing their music in a more complex and progressive direction. This move ended up slowly unraveling the band, as the following years leading up to Nude were marked by constant lineup instability, eventually leading to original keyboardist Peter Bardens to exit after 1978's Breathless, leaving Andrew Latimer and Andy Ward the only remaining original members by this point. The lineup for Nude includes Andrew Latimer, guitars, vocals, flute, koto, and various keyboards, Andy Ward, drums and percussion, Colin Bass, or is it Colin Bass? Bass and vocals, Mel Collins, flute, piccolo, saxophone, Duncan McKay, keyboards, Jan Scheelhaas, piano on The Last Farewell, Chris Green, cello, Gasper Lawal, percussion on Changing Places, Herbie Flowers, tuba, and it also features lyrics penned by Susan Hoover, Andrew Latimer's partner. It's curious to me that this is the lineup that recorded this album, but the touring band ended up including regular members Kit Watkins and Jan Scheelhaas, who were unavailable for the album's sessions. It makes Nude even more unique to me, and one of the things that impresses me the most is that, despite the apparent behind-the-scenes turbulence, it still maintains the Camel identity, while also offering up some of the band's most memorable material, in my opinion. Much like 1975's music inspired by the Snow Goose, Nude is a concept album. It is not based on a novel this time, but rather a true story. With lyrics penned by Latimer's partner Susan Hoover, Nude tells the story of Hiro Onoda, a Japanese soldier who had escaped capture in the jungle on the island of Lubang in the Philippines. He received no communication from his commanders and had no idea that World War II had ended in 1945, leading him to live out his life in the mountains, continuing to fight a war that was long over. Of course, he was eventually found and welcomed home as a hero in February of 1974, but found it difficult to adjust to civilian life after 30 years. Like Snow Goose, this concept provides Camel the license to allow their imaginations to run wild with the material. While largely instrumental, the lyrics seem to me to be a bit stronger content-wise than previous Camel records, as Hoover's words are dripping with pathos and are largely written from Onoda's point of view. It's true that Latimer's voice is sometimes difficult for me to reconcile with. It's not necessarily bad, and it is authentic sounding. In fact, it seems to grow on me more and more all of the time. It puts me in the mind again of David Gilmour, but strangely, I feel that the era of Gilmour I'm referring to didn't occur until the mid to late 80s and early 90s. I also feel that Camel's music is a lot more interesting than a lot of that 80s and 90s Pink Floyd and David Gilmour material. Andrew Latimer's guitar playing, however, is entirely his own. Sure, he might make me think a little of this player or that, such as Robin Trower, but he's built his own vocabulary of sounds and phrasings that I simply cannot mistake for anyone else. I would in fact suggest that Andy's guitar playing, as well as his flute playing, are what draw me most to this very unique band. This time around, vocally and instrumentally, Latimer is well assisted by his supporting cast of players. Bassist Colin Bass sings lead on Drafted, a memorable ballad. Bass, or is it bass, is a wonderful addition to the band's lineup. He definitely serves a similar role as Doug Ferguson to me, but he feels much more versatile as a bassist, particularly in the tone department, where he excels. But I never feel like his technique gets in the way of musical expression or holding the band down in a similar way as Doug Ferguson did. We also have Mel Collins, ex and future King Crimson member, duetting on flute with Latimer, as well as doubling Latimer's guitar with his sax at some points, which creates some interesting timbres throughout the recording. Duncan McKay and Andrew Latimer are jointly credited as keyboardists, and it is a bit tough at times for me as a layperson to tell who exactly is playing what. My observation, though, is that the relationship shared between Latimer's guitar and Barden's organ that exemplified so much of the early material has been largely de-emphasized. Often you hear the two keyboards playing off one another, and one thing I noted is that the digital keyboard tones are well chosen and appropriately used in the arrangements. I don't always appreciate digital keyboard tones of the early 80s, but here they are used to beautiful effect. Once again, Andy Ward proves to be a Camel MVP. In his sadly final appearance on a Camel record, he adapts seamlessly to the range of styles here. He perfectly serves the poppier tunes, while his funky, progressive style drives the band forward during the more dramatic moments like Beached and Captured. Much like the White Rider from Mirage, his marching snare is a feature throughout this album, and to me it is one of the album's signatures. Of the three recently released Camel 5.1 mixes, Nude is the only one that I'm hearing for the first time. As such, I don't have much to compare it to, other than itself and other Camel material. Unlike the other reissues, there is absolutely no bonus material to be found here. In this package, you get Ben Wiseman's 2023 stereo remaster and Stephen W. Taylor's stereo and 5.1 remixes. On my first listen of Nude, I wasn't sure if I was going to connect with it, because City Life and Drafted border so closely on soft rock. I love the Alan Parsons project, but it's not really the sort of thing that I'm looking for with Camel, and it took me aback at first. Once I got to the fabulous instrumental sequence, Docks and Beached, I gradually warmed to the idea that this is a very different kind of Camel record, and I've started to really appreciate those opening tunes on subsequent plays. Some parts of the album do border on new age, And if I'm honest, so does the Snow Goose album. And it can be a tad empty for me at times, like a film soundtrack removed from the images. That said, there are definitely standout songs, such as the bluesy Lies, which reminds me a little bit of Dave Gilmour or Robin Trower again. Lies contains the album's finest guitar solo and a standout vocal performance from Andrew Latimer. It's passionate and soulful, and it really sticks to me. The bombastic Captured, which to my ears is this album's version of Dunkirk, is a further disc highlight. And one thing that I really dig about this record is that how every one of the standout songs to me is in a different genre. Captured brings the tempo up, with great sax from Mel Collins, dizzying acoustic guitar work from Latimer, and hypnotic drum patterns from Ward. It does somewhat make me think of the Alan Parsons Project again, but in a very good way. This album is also marked by its absolutely outstanding flute work, and woodwind enthusiasts, such as myself, are treated to a couple of tunes in a row which feature flute. Changing Places is a gorgeous melody, with its ritualistic tribal drumming and dual flutes that wouldn't be out of place on a later 70s gong album like Shamal. It even makes me think of a later Ian Anderson work, such as 1995's Divinities, 12 Dances with God, or even the epic Drink from the Same Well, which can be found on the latest Tall record, Curious Ruminant, which I did review on this channel, should you be interested. I'm not so sure Please Come Home or the very ambient Reflections do a whole lot for me. Reflections at least has some nice guitar playing, but I feel that these kinds of songs are perhaps the album's weak point. They are a bit too far down the incidental music path for me, and as I mentioned, can seem a bit empty at times. That said, overall, this is one of the most rewarding Camel records for me. It manages to be soft and calming, but it's also really melodically and rhythmically engaging. Despite its relative calmness, it does have a few moments that get really intense, much like the Snow Goose does. But in some ways, I think that this album might be even more well-rounded and satisfying than the 1975 classic. So, now that I've given some background on the band Camel, as well as my review of this album Nude, let's talk about the different mixes. So on disc 1, as well as the Blu-ray disc, you have Ben Wiseman's stereo remaster. And I'd never heard this album before, so my entry point was the 5.1 mix. So going back to Wiseman's stereo remaster of the original mix was rather interesting. I actually found that the original mix of this album sounded quite good to begin with. My impression is that it was quite clear and dynamic already and very natural sounding. I think that Andrew Latimer always was careful about selecting good production teams. At least that's my impression from the albums that I've heard. As for the 5.1 mix, as good as the original mix is on disc 1, I do appreciate what Stephen W. Tayler has done with lifting a lot of the parts out of the mix. It's definitely easier to hear how the album's arrangements were put together, and the mixes are quite punchy without changing the character of the original mix much at all. A song like Docks features a deep, undulating bass groove, while the guitars cascade and soar around the room like gulls. There's great positioning by Tayler of the duetting flutes on songs like Changing Places, and some more cinematic moments like the gunshot at the end of Pomp and Circumstance is really effectively used in terms of surround sound positioning. There's also a really nice 5.1 moment in the song Lies, where you get to the bridge and there's this organ solo up front and the electric piano in the back. It's almost like if Keith Emerson played Rick Wright's Funky Dung solo in Pink Floyd's Atom Heart Mother. It's really bluesy and fun, and the 5.1 format allows it to open up and sound really big. Some thoughts on Stephen W. Tayler in general. He's become one of those names that if I see him involved with a project, I know it's going to be worth checking out. I admire Taylor's 5.1 surround sound work immensely, and I feel that his work proves that Steven Wilson ain't the only game in town. If you look at his credits, he's been at it a few extra decades, and I think it shows in the work. Okay, his mixes don't take nearly as many chances with panning or spatial effects like Wilson's do, but he offers faithful recreations of the stereo mixes, transferred tastefully to 3 dimensions. His work with bands like Vandergraaf Generator and Hawkwind prove this too. His 5.1 mixes are subtle, and they are non-gimmicky. Many times they are quite front-heavy, but everything has its own place within the mix. He tends to place a lot of reverb, keyboards, rhythm guitars, backing vocals, and overdubs in the back channels. Drums, lead guitars, and vocals are often evenly spread amongst the front channels. In other words, the background is in the back speakers and the foreground is in the front. It's rather a simple formula, really. I do think that his 5.1 mixes, included on the Blu-ray here, are a little better overall than the stereo mixes, which are on disc 2, but you really can't go wrong with either. So, on to the recommendation. Do I recommend the 2025 Esoteric Records edition of Camel's Nude? Well, if, like me, you missed out on the Airborne box set from a few years ago, definitely I think this is worth checking out, particularly if you are a surround sound enthusiast or a fan of progressive rock of this era, or Tayler's work in general. If you do have the Airborne box set, there really isn't anything new here for you, but for those of you who missed it, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's a great and satisfying album with a lot of Camel's trademarks, but transposed into that early 80s landscape of albums like Drama or A. It's full of great writing, great playing, dynamic instrumental music, and sparse but thoughtful lyrics. You really can't go wrong with this one, despite my criticisms of some of the more ambient pieces, and I think the 5.1 mix here is one of the best. It's absolutely perfect. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It is the best way to encourage me to create more content like this and to show your appreciation. So far, I have reviewed 2 of the other releases in this 2025 series of Esoteric releases. And those are Mirage and Moon Madness. You can see those on the channel right now. So please consider checking them out if you haven't. If this video series does well, I will consider going back and picking up the Live Pressure Points Blu-ray, which I've never seen. And I do have plans to review the Snow Goose 2025 edition when it's released next month. My immediate plans are to do a video on Vandergraaf Generator's Pawn Hearts album. And in early May, we have Pink Floyd's Live in Pompeii Blu-ray, and that contains a new 4K transfer and fresh color grading, and it looks absolutely fantastic from the YouTube clips. And that Live in Pompeii Blu-ray will feature remixed audio from Steven Wilson in 5.1 and Atmos. So I do plan to check that out. Not to mention, on that same day, we also have Gentle Giants Playing the Fool, complete live experience, Atmos and 5.1 to check out. So I do hope to review both of those. And later in the month, we will be finally getting Wilson's Chicago 2 5.1 mix, which I've been waiting for years. That is one of the rare Steven Wilson remix projects that only came out as a stereo CD. I cannot wait to hear what he does with the Ballet from a Girl from Buchanan suite. That's one of my favorite things any rock band has ever done. Once again, subscribe if you don't want to miss any of that, or if you just want to show your support and encouragement. It's been real fun talking to you, and you'll hear from me real soon. Bye-bye.